Hello and welcome to A Gypsy's Kiss, the vlog. I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Unit. Stick with us for a couple of seconds, and I will tell you why Forrest Fenn did not hide a treasure in 2009 or 2010.
And we're back. So, what?
Yeah, I've come to the conclusion that Forrest didn't hide a treasure in 2009 or 2010.
Okay, well, I guess technically he did not say in the book that he did, right?
Actually, he does infer in the book that he did. The question is, did he hide a treasure? The answer is yes. Did he hide the treasure in 2009 or 2010? The answer is no. Let me show you why. So as you said, all of this started in the book, right? On page 128, it says he gets cancer at age 58. That would have been 1988. And page 129, he says, I figured I had a year to live. And he talks about scurrying around, buying the box and filling it with these various treasures. And then on page 131, he says, and like Eric Sloane, at age almost 80, I figured it was time to act. So I wrote a poem. Actually, the poem had been written long before that, but what he means is he wrote the poem into the book. And we're going to come back and revisit those in just a little bit. But let's see where it all started. And it all started when Dale Neitzel started posting letters to Forrest on his blog with Forrest's permission. And there was a constant set of questions, many of them repetitive. And one of them was about where people were going off to search for the treasure. And Forrest would work in something like, no need to look for the treasure in a place where a 79 or 80-year-old man couldn't go with a 44-pound treasure chest full of gold and precious coins. And throughout 2012, he pretty much sticks with the idea that it was a single box weighing from 42 to 44 pounds. He never splits it up into two trips, et cetera, et cetera. But in each case, he reminds them, don't do this. Don't go down canyons where a 79 or 80-year-old man wouldn't go. By 2013, he did the interview with Tony DeCopel, who was hostile. Tony didn't actually believe that Fenn had hidden a treasure. And he wrote a couple articles, one very recently, where he still questions whether Forrest actually did this. He told Tony, people who go looking for the treasure should not search where a 79 or 80-year-old man could not take it, Fenn told me. Right? Don't if you're 79 or 80 and carrying a treasure around, don't go looking for those places. At the Collected Works bookstore, he says, the treasure is heavy. I made 2 trips to hide it. Now we're up to 2 trips, separating the treasure in the box. Where I wanted it to be, I've told people, don't look for a treasure in a place where a 79 or 80-year-old guy can take it. Now I started to see a pattern in the way he was saying that exactly. The big one was in the Moby Dickens video, where he was very specific. And I thought about that a lot when I hid the treasure chest and I had to make 2 trips because the thing weighs 42 pounds, 22 pounds worth of treasure and 20 pounds worth of box. That's why I've told people that I buried the trez. And he stops there because of the buried word. He doesn't want anybody to believe that he buried the treasure. So he stops in the middle of that word, trez, and corrects himself that I hid the treasure chest. And everybody focused on that. When everybody heard that quote in the Moby Dickens video, they started focusing on the buried versus hid. I followed it on. He said, when I was either 79 or 80 years old, because I don't want the exact date to be known. Well, you know what? I tell people that my driver's license says I weigh 195 pounds. Right?
You tell people that. They
Yeah.
ask you that, huh?
Well, people walk up and say, hey, Porky, how big exactly are you? No, they don't. It's not quite that bad. Okay. But it's an example, right? An example, if you walked up and said, hey, how much do you weigh? I'd say, well, my driver's license says I weigh 195 pounds.
And if you said, how old are you? And I would say, how old do you think I am?
Yeah, exactly. My answer to that one is, I'm old enough not to know better than to answer that question. So he was telling people, yeah, I was 79 or 80 when I hid that treasure. I weigh 195, right? It's one thing to say, I've told people that. That's not a lie, right? He's not telling a lie. If there's any fib in all of this, is the fact that that he has told people that. In People magazine, 2016, I took 2 trips. Now it's firmed up, right? I took 2 trips in my car to hide the treasure. And I can tell you an 80-year-old man is not going to make a trip into that canyon. Well, of course, an 80-year-old man wouldn't make a trip into that canyon. Maybe he didn't even make a trip into that canyon when he was 80. But could he have been 70 and made that trip? Don't, in the same interview, don't look for that treasure any place where an 80-year-old man could not have taken it. In none of these does Forrest ever say,
I was 80 years old.
I was 80 years old when I hid that treasure. He just has these obtuse references to 79 and 80-year-old men who at this point should be taking offense at how often he mentions them as unable to carry weight of any kind. So, so if I look at that, he was born in 1930, and this is how we got here. He was born in 1930. He talks about this 79 or 80 all the time. Not that he hid it, but that he tells people that he was 79 or 80, or that people that are 79 or 80 shouldn't be hiding treasures or whatever. That's where the 2009, 2010 time frame came from.
Right.
Except there's that thing in the book.
Which thing?
The thing about Eric Sloane,
Yes.
where he says, so at age 80, something like that.
Almost 80.
Right. Let's go back and look at that, because this is how we've always interpreted it. And like Eric Sloane, at age almost 80, I figured it was time to act. So I wrote a poem. And what we've always read it, what most people have read it as, what I've read it as, was blocking this out. At age almost 80, I figured it was time to act, assuming that he was referring to himself. Okay? So Eric Sloane is an interesting character. He was a very good friend of Forrest's. Eric Sloane was born in 1905 and died in 1985. He was almost 80. And he had just completed his seminal work, the story of his life, called 80, An American Souvenir, in which Eric Sloane tells the intensely personal story of his life in words and images. Who or what does that sound like?
Well, it sounds like Forrest in his book.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. So now go back and look at that quote and imagine this instead. Imagine that almost 80 is associated with the first part of this sentence. And like Eric Sloane, at age almost 80, Eric Sloane, I figured it was time to act, so I wrote a poem.
And
I don't
those
think...
commas are in both places, so you could read it either way.
Exactly. That's what makes it convenient, is because you could interpret it either way. And we have always interpreted at block here, ends here, as opposed to block here, ends here. Eric Sloane was a man who was loved and respected by Forrest Fenn. As a matter of fact, in one of his recent scrapbooks, he mentions him again in a very loving way. He really cared about him, and I think he missed him. And he didn't know him that long. I think that's what disturbed him so much, is that he only knew him for a short period before he died in 1985. Then, in 1987, Marvin Fenn dies. In my humble opinion, Marvin Fenn would have been the only guy that could have prevented Forrest from doing something crazy and or stupid, like hiding a box with $2 million worth of treasure. Marvin Fenn would have likely guilt-tripped Forrest into not doing it. Because for Marvin Fenn, that would have been sinful, if not a crime.
Well, and like I think most of us, when our parents are alive, we don't want to do something that would offend them, that they would call us out on.
Right.
Because just that relationship that we have with our parents.
Now, at this point, there is no plan to hide any treasure. right? There is no
Right.
plan to buy a box. There isn't anything.
He doesn't even know
But-
he has cancer yet.
Exactly. Last obstacle, right? And the resolution of his relationship with his father, right? I'm going to take some pills. I'll be there tomorrow. I'll fly there tomorrow. Don't worry about it. I'm doing what I want to do. And Forrest was fine with that. All right. So comes 1988. They told me I had a year. 1988, he gets cancer. They told him he had a year to live. So I decided I knew where I was going to hide the treasure chest. I told myself with my last gasping breath, I was going to fling myself on top of that treasure chest and let my bones go back to the dirt. It was a great plan. The trouble with it is I got well. I ruined the story. 1988. Then this happened. So he, as you know, did an interview with Isaac from the On the Road with Charlie podcast. It was recorded. It was actually recorded back in April, and it was published in early May. And in that interview, Forrest says, I worked on the poem on and off for a few years, the implication being after that 1988 time frame, in that 1988 time frame, because I had to change it. I thought I was going to die, but he didn't. So yeah, in one version, he talks about, so leave my bones where they lay and take the chest and go in peace. And he had to rewrite it starting in 1988. And then he says to Isaac, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I was going to do. His word gone up, by the way. 15 years from the start to the time I actually hid the treasure. That number doesn't work out. And it also stimulated an old memory of mine from the Moby Dickens video when I remember Fenn saying twice in the same sentence, as if to reinforce it. So it was 15 years from the time that I got cancer until the time that I hid that treasure chest. 15 years. I don't see how it gets any more specific than that. Mm-hmm. If you add 15 years to 1988 when he gets cancer, that means the treasure was hidden by 2003. What do you think?
I see the math, and I also wondered about that when I saw it on the Moby Dickens video, and we've discussed it several times. Have you ever had the chance to ask him about it?
I never have, only because I hadn't thought about it this much. At Moby Dickens, the closest opportunity I got was I noticed it at Moby Dickens, but I was busy packing up my equipment, and he was busy entertaining the audience that was there afterwards. So there was no real chance. And what was really funny is there were several searchers there, including Katya. And no one asked, well, wait a minute, could you say that again? Mm-hmm. They just all let it slide. And I think they let it slide because the distraction of the buried versus hid, right? Where he stops, I buried the treasure. And then he says, I hid the treasure. And there was no focus on that 15-year time frame from the time he got cancer to the time he hid the treasure.
It's a classic misdirection.
It's a beautiful misdirection. I'm not sure if that, in that case, it was unintentional. Now, the don't go where a 79 or 80-year-old man, as you well know, would go, as you know, is a classic liar's technique without necessarily lying.
Right.
Don't go. I can't find a citation. I find statements where people have written, he said, I was 79 or 80. I can't find that. He says, don't go where a 79 or 80-year-old man can't go, or or can't carry a 42-pound load, or whatever. So it is classic misdirection without actually lying. He's not lying. Mm-hmm. He's telling you, don't go someplace where an 80-year-old man couldn't go.
Well, and in that misdirection, he's manipulating your beliefs.
Exactly.
And your beliefs is what you're going with when you go out and look for that treasure. I believe he was this old when he went and hid that treasure. So you're factoring that into your search criteria that he was this age, it was this year, and this existed and this did not, and these things happened since then, and this happened and that happened, and you're figuring out your whole timeline and your search criteria based on him being that age.
Well, even if he wasn't that age, he was between 70 and 73. Now, I've seen the physical changes in Forrest between the time I first met him in 2012 and now. And they were dramatic. In 2012, he was still pretty sprightly and active. So I imagine at age 70, I'm 68. So I'm only 2 years away from that. And I feel like I could go down a canyon with a 42-pound weight.
You can
we've
do
done
a 22-mile bike ride. You can do that.
And carry photo equipment following you around all
Sure,
these places.
you can do
So
all that.
I think that's very possible for him, and it changes the dynamic. So the conclusion I've come to, that Fenn didn't hide the treasure in 2009, 2010, it's more likely that he hid it in 2001, 2002. Right?
Right.
It was 71, 72.
Right. So in the film that we just saw, The Lure, author Douglas Preston mentions to Desert File,
Yeah.
which is David Rice. He talks to him during the film about how he had not only seen the treasure, but held the gold in his hand. So we know the treasure existed. Douglas Preston saw it. He also talks about it in the Collected Works video, that he saw the treasure. He knows it exists. He witnessed that treasure, but he never says when that happened, what year it was. So do we know anything about that?
March 2013 of Jenny Kyle's Mysterious Writing Blogs. She interviews Preston, and she asks him about his book called The Codex, in which Preston, it's a mystery novel, and it's about a man named Maxwell Bumper Car. I don't know. I can't remember his last name. Who is dying, is an eccentric millionaire, dying from cancer, and decides to send his sons on a chase for his fortunes. And they end up in Central America, mostly in Honduras.
And the Codex.
And the Codex describes that story. The Codex is the clue that he leaves behind. He admits to Jenny at that time that he had had that conversation with Forrest, and that's where he got the idea to write the Codex.
And the interview took place in what year?
That interview took place in 2013.
And what year was the book published?
Coincidentally, the book was published in 2003. That means sometime before 2003. This book had not yet been written. Douglas Preston had had conversations with Forrest regarding his concept and turned that into a mystery novel. And probably at that time, Forrest gave him the opportunity to see what that much treasure looked like. So that means that everything was in place by 2003. Number one, Fenn had a credible witness in Douglas Preston. Douglas had seen the treasure, had talked with Fenn about the concept, and then written a book published in 2003 that describes the series of events that took place. If he hit it in that 2001, 2003 time frame, that would give it the opportunity to tolerate the test of time. He could leave it in one place and see if anybody bumped into it.
And go back and check on it.
Because nobody would know necessarily. It is very likely that sometime between 2003 and the publishing of the book, just for the heck of it, he would have to go back and see if that treasure had been found by anyone. Mm-hmm. He didn't sell his plane until October of 2002, meaning that the very last act he could have taken as part of that plane that he loved so much was to hide this treasure. That opens up a lot of territory, including Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. It gets back to what could he have done in a day, and it questions my rationale for it's only in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. The FBI searched his house in 2009, and as part of a much bigger ancient artifact sting happening in 4 states. They didn't charge him. They didn't find anything. They didn't charge him with anything. You'd think if the FBI had bumped into a 10 by 10 by 6-inch box full of gold, jewels, ancient artifacts from the Aztecs, the Mayans, Native Americans, and the Chinese, they would have had something to say about that. He would have had to at least have explained what it was all about. And I guarantee you the FBI wouldn't have taken that explanation without inviting them to the FBI office in Albuquerque. Nothing there in 2009. Mm-hmm. The paper trail, had he hidden it in 2000, and 1 through 3, by 2010, the evidentiary trail would be cold at best and non-existent at worst.
Which is why he said he didn't want anybody going back and checking his records and trying to figure out when he hid it.
Yeah, that's why I tell people that I hid it when I was 79 or 80, because I don't want them checking the records from 2000, parentheses, from 2001 to 2003. Mm-hmm. Not a lie, but not the truth. And finally, by 2003, everything is in place. He could die, right? And everything would work out. The treasure would either be out there, or if he lived, he could write a book with a poem. He might even have a way between the time you can't. No, none of us can predict we're going to die. But at that point, everything is in place. Mm-hmm. Forrest Fenn did not hide a treasure in 2009 or 2010. Forrest Fenn hid a treasure sometime between 2001 and 2003. So, what does that mean for us?
Yeah, what does that mean for us?
That means two things. Number one, we should probably get a copy of the Codex just to read through it and see if there's anything there. I think it would be an accidental hint rather than an intentional or unintentional one, but it might be worth a good read, right? Mm-hmm. And number two, I believe we're one step closer to finding that treasure.
We are.
Yes.
Okay, one step.
One step, because we have to do it one step at a time.
Right. And getting straight on the truth is an important thing, because once you know the truth, then you know which way to go.
The truth shall set you free.
That's right.
Right?
Right. So, join us next week when we talk about Fenn's quotes from The Lure, which is the film that we saw last week about the searchers for the Fenn treasure. And if you haven't seen it yet, please take a look at the interview we did with the filmmaker, Thomas Leach. And that's on our channel, A Gypsy's Kiss on YouTube. So please join us next week for that great opportunity to hear once again from Forrest Fenn. And for A Gypsy's Kiss, the vlog, I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Eunice. Thanks for watching. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye-bye.